Hello, everyone. This video is part 3 of chapter 3, which talks about the effects of digital gaming and the media playground. Now, you may recognize some of these men. We have the Combine shooters, we have the Sandy Hook shooter, and the Aurora movie shooter. What do three of these mass shooters have in common? Well, they played video games. For a long time, society has blamed uh, mass tragedies such as school shootings or mass shootings on the violent effects of video games. So, what is the science behind the effects of video
There's
games?
no way anyone beats him!
Video games are everywhere nowadays, invading your living rooms, storming your phones, even taking the blame for society's ills.
These video games to dehumanize individuals.
Like after the recent wave of shootings when American politicians shared thoughts, prayers, and concerns about video games.
This was maybe a video game to this evil demon. He wanted to be a super soldier for his Call of Duty game.
Even the president urged us to stop the glorification of violence in our society, including
the gruesome and grisly video games that are now commonplace.
Objection!
Let's debunk this whole video games causes violence red herring once and for all.
You lose. Continue.
I'm Charlie Goldberg. I've been reporting on video games for 8 years. I've been a lifelong video game player. I've amassed nearly 2 million subscribers on my gaming YouTube channel. And well, I play a lot of video games. The violent ones. The shooter ones more specifically. I also love Legos. I'm a father. I know I'm just one gamer, but I'm not a threat to society, and neither are the millions of other people who play video games. Let's take a look at the world of evidence. American video game sales per person are on similar levels to countries like South Korea, Japan, or Germany, but our rate of violent gun deaths is 10 to 100 times higher than any of those countries. Even within America, there's zero empirical evidence that video games are linked to mass shootings. Decades of research from the American Psychological Association have shown there's no link between playing violent video games and participating in violent crime.
This all looks nominal.
No link, no evidence.
So, what does that mean? This is obviously an opinion piece from the New York Times that is suggesting that there isn't a link between violent video games and violence in society. So, again, let's look back at the research. Well, a lot of research suggests that there's no significant relationship between violent video game exposure and school shooting instances. And so, this suggests that while we may want to place the blame on violence in video game culture, on violence that we experience in the world, there has not actually been a causal relationship proven by science. In fact, the only type of true scientific cause that we have seen is that there is a significant positive correlation between exposure to violent video games and adolescent aggression, meaning feelings of wanting to um, be more violent. But the correlation just suggests that those two things are connected. But it may be that adolescents who are more aggressive are more likely to play violent video games. So this isn't a causal relationship, it's a correlation, meaning that they're linked, but not necessarily causing one another. And so, again, you really have to understand the science behind video game research to understand the true nature of the effects. Now, science again has shown that there is an increased aggression in users, and the significant effect comes from playing video games that are violent and increasing aggression. However, these effects are only seen in very short term time spans. In other words, it's when a violent video game is played, these aggressive thoughts are stimulated for just a few minutes. However, the effect can increase the more someone is exposed or the more they play violent video games, because over time you're really hardwiring your aggression to create a more aggressive personality. This is why when people play violent video games at a very young age, they're more likely then to have an aggressive personality. But again, that means more likely. It doesn't mean a causal relationship. Again, we're only suggesting that they might be linked together. Now, the problem is that most violent video game studies are only done in short term. So we really need what's called longitudinal data or long term data to suggest what happens over time. And there is some study that suggests that after a long term repeated exposure to violent video games, where we're talking about hours and hours of violent video game play each day, can increase aggression. And it's seen in gaming populations worldwide. However, we typically don't have the average user typically does not get to that level of gameplay, and therefore those effects would not be seen. But what we do see sometimes in video game studies is that there are higher levels of aggressive thoughts, emotions, and behavior, a decrease in empathy, rewarding violent behavior, and even dehumanization or desensitization, meaning that you're less likely to see a person as a person. And sometimes you may see them just as another video game player, and desensitization means that you become more and more used to violence. But again, these are very short term effects and haven't been proven conclusively. So, where does the myth that violent video games are linked to violent behavior come from? Well, one of the first studies to really show this causal link was 2000 in 2009 by someone named Bartlett. He had people play 15 minutes of Mortal Kombat and showed significant increased physical arousal and aggressive thoughts and behavior. So, what this scientist thought was that hostile thoughts and feelings would be created by violent video game play, but they only lasted 4 minutes, according to this study. And the aggressive behavior and elevated heart rate only lasted 10 minutes total. So the biological reaction only lasted 10 minutes. So higher quality studies show that gamers are inclined. Um, to inflict higher levels of discomfort on others, those haven't been proven. And so there are a lot of problems with the research that exists on violent video game play, suggesting that the effect is more something that we think is there, but scientifically has not been proven yet. One of the main problems is that aggression and violence are often used interchangeably, but that's not true. Just because you're aggressive doesn't mean you're ever going to hurt someone. And aggression can even just be a thought pattern that you never actually live out or think upon. Most studies also only use one particular game for a fixed amount of time, which doesn't really simulate the real world of gaming. In addition, they're trying to establish a causal relationship between real life aggression and playing video games. But you really have to consider a ton of other factors, such as someone's age, their gender, their personality. And there's just not enough of a link between the two to suggest conclusively that violent video games create violent behavior. So there's really a lot of things that you can consider, including the fact that it may be that people with aggressive personalities seek out violent video games. This is called a downward spiral model, where aggressive players are more likely to play video games to satisfy their aggressive needs. And a 2010 study actually found that individuals with high emotion, high indifference for others, and high and rule breaking behaviors were more likely to experience the negative outcomes of video game violence than people who did not have these personality traits. What this suggests is that the cause may actually be that those people who are already aggressive and would already be violent despite violent video games use violent video games as a outlet for their violence and aggression, which can either be healthy or it can cause them to downward spiral and want to seek out more violence in their needs. But the idea is that they were already violent to begin with. So it wasn't violent video games that were creating their personality that already existed. Now, beyond violence, there are other concerns with gaming. A new mental health disorder is called gaming disorder, and this is by the World Health Organization. And who considers someone to have a gaming disorder when they are addicted? And so, addiction affects 8.5% of Americans. And this, of course, is specifically for video games. But we don't even have the highest levels of video game addiction. Countries like Germany and China tend to lead the way. Now, in terms of appropriateness, 9% of games are rated M by the council that determines the ratings for video game play. And that is down 13% from 2017. So, more and more video game companies are trying to make games that are more appropriate and age appropriate for gamers who are becoming younger and younger. Another concern with the gaming community is growing misogyny or the portrayal of women as pure sex objects and very limited representation of strong and powerful females. Now, again, this is changing as diversity continues to increase in video game developers. But there has been a lack of diversity. In the history of the gaming community, which has predominantly served white males. And so we are seeing an increase in diversity in video game development and the video games themselves, but this still needs improvement. Now, one example of misogyny that is, extreme, and we're certainly not saying that every video game player believes these things or anything like that. So I want to caveat with that. But there is a very dark side of gaming culture that puts down women. And Gamergate is a prime example of that, where female journalists or female gamers were harassed to the point of death threats, having pictures of them sent bloody and bruised to them, being called all kinds of terrible, awful things because they were trying to talk about the representation of women in the gaming community. Now, again, Gamergate certainly does not speak for every gamer by any means. I play video games pretty regularly. And as a woman, I generally feel accepted, but there are certainly those dark corners of gaming communities that represent this type of thing. And it is something we need to be aware of. However, despite all these negative effects that we hear all the time of video games actually have a lot of positive effects as well. The first is the cognitive or mental benefits of playing games. Studies show conclusively that users playing shooter games actually show faster and more accurate attention allocation, meaning that they can put their attention where it needs to be. They also have higher spatial resolution and visual processing, meaning that they have the ability to see space at a wider ability than non gamers, and enhanced mental rotation abilities, meaning they can quickly turn their mental thought process. In addition, video games have been proven to show. Or improve children's creative capabilities. And so, again, gaming is not all negative. In fact, very little of the negative effects of gaming have been proven. Cognitive benefits have been shown with rigorous study to improve the mental benefits of gaming. Additionally, there are emotional benefits to gaming. Games that have low cognitive demands, meaning, those casual games, they tend to improve players' moods, promote relaxation, and ward off anxiety. In addition, It teaches players the benefits of dealing with frustration and anxiety in adaptive ways. So, when you can't beat that level, you have to think through your ways of getting through that frustration and anxiety. And that's actually healthy in terms of your emotional growth. There are also motivational benefits. Games teach basic lessons such as persistence and how to deal with failure. In addition, it's about always being optimistic about being able to reach your goals. And so these are motivational benefits that have been shown for gaming. And then, of course, there are social benefits of gaming. Lots of gaming is social that utilizes cooperative play. And so that really helps people to become more social, and these helping behaviors are observed even within violent video games. In fact, a study suggested that violent games played cooperatively seem to decrease players' access to aggressive cognitions. So, again, when we're playing video games with a bunch of people, even if they're violent, we actually decrease our aggression. So, you can see that the research on the effects of gaming tend to more conclusively show positive benefits as opposed to negative, but we always need to be aware of the social issues that surround the gaming community because it is so very influential in our culture. I hope you've enjoyed chapter 3. Make sure that you reach out with any questions you may have, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.